This is The Future Of, where experts share their vision of the future and how their work is helping shape it for the better.
Hello, I'm Tom Robinson. Welcome to a new episode of The Future Of. Before we get started, I'm excited to say that today is our very first birthday. It's been 1 year since we launched The Future Of from Curtin University in Perth, Western Australia. So far, we've produced a total of 42 episodes with 57 experts, exploring what the future might hold in areas from social media to living cement, space exploration and pandemics. So today, we're discussing the future of journalism. I'm actually a journalism student here at Curtin Uni, so I'm very keen to explore this topic. Journalism is an industry that's adapted to radio and television, survived the demise of print, but now faces new challenges, including fake news, falling revenues, and growing public distrust. To discuss these issues with me today are Dr. Catherine Shine and Glyn Greensmith. Catherine is a journalist and the course coordinator of the journalism program at Curtin Uni, and Glyn is also a journalist and Curtin researcher. They're both my teachers as well, so the pressure's on to make this a pretty good episode. It's great to have you both on the show.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for having us, and happy birthday, podcast.
Yes. We wanted to bring the party poppers in, but we didn't get there. Catherine, hundreds of jobs have been lost in the journalism industry recently. Why is the industry in such trouble?
Well, the pandemic has really shown how vulnerable the media industry is to loss of advertising. So, ironically, people have been turning to news more so than before and actually trusting news more so than before during this period because they have needed this vital information about coronavirus. But because most media organisations still rely on the advertising model and most businesses are not in a position to advertise at this time, it's caused a lot of problems for those media organisations.
Glyn, it's been a big year, politically, socially. Is good journalism, is a strong journalism industry needed more than ever?
Oh my God. It's, do any of us doubt that as we look out the window? And it's so important that we make that separation from what Catherine was just saying, which is it's such a simple thing to say, but it really is the ball game here. Journalism as a concept isn't failing. The business model is. Now, a lot of these organizations can and did make a profit. For a long time, we used to call it in newspapers the rivers of gold. You want a date, you want an apartment, you want a car, you go to your paper. They were warned well in advance, guys, this is not going to last. There's this new thing called the internet. And they all said, almost in unison around the world, the internet, please. And that's why we're seeing a shrinking of newsrooms. It's the business model that has failed to adapt. I cannot look around this world. We've seen some extraordinary examples of willful ignorance around the world and in Australia. We are seeing a new revolution in people's refusal to believe what is real and what is true. Reality is that, of course, which when you don't believe it, doesn't change. So I'll put that to one side, and that's where the fake news is. It gets very nuanced. There's a difference between not wanting to believe something because it conflicts with your opinion and refusing to believe that gravity exists or that the earth is round. Like, that's a whole different ballgame. Apart from that, I don't think there's ever been a bigger appetite for the truth and for news. So there's this revolutionary re-understanding of journalism at the same time as there's a revolutionary, disastrous failure of the business model and a failure to adapt to the changing environment. And I think it's a really crucial distinction to make.
What adaptations need to be made?
Well, there's the ball game, isn't it? Like, how do you pay for this thing? Is simple enough. This thing needs paying for, right? We need professional journalists doing professional news in the public interest. What we've had for decades, when it was just the only game in town, is we shifted the boundaries of what the public need to know to what the public want to know. And the want to know aspect got further than it was ever supposed to. The want to know stuff is what's going to sell more adverts on my radio station or in Catherine's newspaper. The need to know is the foundation of journalism. That is what it is. That's the definition of it. That's why when democracy was invented 2,500 years ago, there was a great discussion by Plato and Socrates around the need for an informed citizenry. They said, without an informed citizenry, this will fail. Not might, this will fail. They said without a citizenry that knows what's happening, then there will be demagoguery. Will be, not might be. So everything we are looking at in our world today was entirely predicted at the very foundation of journalism. And all we've done is we just lost a bit of the relationship between, well, you need to know this, but you want to know who's sleeping with whom, who's having a fight, which reality is it. And that's fine. Human nature says, I kind of want to know some fun stuff because I don't want serious stuff all day. But there's only so much of that we should allow in our society in order to sell you an advert. So there's just some really fundamental areas that it wasn't despotic or willful. It was just this subtle way that things get ingrained and cause a shift. And then, as you know, once you lose something, it's hard to get it back. We had the plurality. We had a relationship with the news where even when we grew up, I think, Catherine, we're both in our mid-40s, you know, there was a relationship to the evening bulletin. There was a relationship to the local newspaper that was really part of every community. And of course, we've lost that. So much of what we're saying is, you know, why did we have that? What did it give us as a society? Can we still have a form of that back again, please?
Catherine, how do you balance that need to know aspect and that want to know aspect when you're training student journalists and the people that will be in the industry in the future?
Well, we really focus on the need to know aspect here. The want to know is that they're not the difficult stories to tell. They're not the investigative stories. They're not the stories where you have to go and seek out, you know, the real people in the community and talk to them. So if you get the skills to do the need to know stories, you can do the want to know. And, you know, I think we need to be realistic about the commercial, you know, how a lot of mainstream media survives. And that is, you know, they have to do it via commercial means. And I think that there will always be a mix, and that's fine up until a point. But when we're training, so I think when we train journalists, they need to be aware of that. But we want them to be, you know, doing the harder stories now while they're learning, and then they can use those skills to apply that to any kind of reporting later on.
And it's wrong to think that those stories aren't popular. People really have a strong. One of the things we've really seen, and one of the major shifts in the landscape, has been a return to real community news. People really do want to know what's going on in their neighborhood, and they're really interested in the people who are out there, who are, maybe they're fascinating, maybe they're trying to fix the problems. So we've seen a massive shift, and this is something that the ABC has been doing, but it's actually something that in the program that we have here at Curtin, we've been doing for a while, is saying, go tell those stories of your town, because people do care. And when the ABC went out to what they felt were underrepresented communities and said, what do you want to talk about? They were really interested in the responses about how much people want to talk about different problems than they see on the news and solutions to those problems. And Catherine and I felt that we were really simpatico with that in what we were preparing our students to do, the kinds of stories we look to engage our students with. That felt very organic to us. So it seems like there are some really positive pathways around what people are looking for. So we shouldn't, you know, it's not just about knowing the fine detail of governmental corruption or who's paid off whom. People do actually have an interest in these stories. They've just been spoon-fed the wrong kind of want-to-know stories for so long that we think there's like this elitist idea of, I know what's going on in my society, and then everybody else only cares about the sportsing and the reality TV. That's actually not true. People really do care about good stories from their communities, and we do that here.
In terms of that business model, and I suppose it sort of plays into education and training as well, the federal government right now is trying to get Google and Facebook, these big tech corporations, to pay for sharing content and paying the big media players like News Corp and Fairfax to help them survive through this, you know, difficult period. I wanted to get both your thoughts on that. Should we be trying to save the status quo, I suppose, or could we be looking to an alternative? Is there a better way to be doing it which would lend itself to telling more community stories, to telling more of the need to know stories?
Oh, look, I don't think it's an either or kind of question. I think that we can have those those big media players can continue to exist, but you can still have perhaps smaller outlets doing more of that community work. I think you don't want to lose. It would be very disappointing to see something like the Sydney Morning Herald or The Age or the West Australian suddenly disappear. Like, you don't want to lose your legacy media because they have the history of a place. They often have some extremely good journalists. They're quite well resourced so they can do the big stories. But yes, sometimes they overlook some of those community stories, or they're not engaging with their communities as best as they can. So I think we want, an ideal model includes a bit of everything. And ideally there should be some support for all of those types of outlets. I completely agree that Facebook and Google should be sharing some of their profits because they use the news to draw people to their sites. And that's one, I think the government should be applauded for looking into that. But I think we need to realise that supporting the media financially is going to involve lots of different elements, not just that.
I like to make it quite, hopefully not simplified in the right way, because I think it's such a complicated argument. So I often think that the lessons that I try and convey to the students about this, I actually find have a really, everyone listening to this is going to be fascinated. Journalism is so, everyone knows it, everyone's aware of it, but it's so unknown still. It's the most remarkable subject in the world. The study of journalism is so fascinating. So we can make that separation. We are, training people for a career, but we're also engaged in one of the most fascinating subjects on planet Earth. What you bring up about Google and Facebook, really, if you deconstruct that, what are we talking about? One decision from one government can change the ball game. Did any of us see double humanities degree fees coming 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago? Did any of us see Hex Help being disappeared for students? One decision from one government can change the ball game. So one of the fundamental lessons of the study of journalism that I try and convey, and I want everybody to have a think about this, is do you think everything is the way it is now because it should be? Like, is this the natural evolution of our world? This bin fire of a planet is like this because, hey, that's the way it should be. So let's not question it, guys. So everything we're talking about here was at one point a decision made by somebody. I'm not going to lie to you, it was usually for self-interest because that's how politics and business works. You know who told us that? Politics and business people, politicians and business people. So when journalism was, if you like, invented in Australia in the 1930s and the early 1940s, there were very strict rules. You can't own too much. No one from overseas should own stuff. There must be diversity. And then those rules were changed in 1981 and 1987 by a Conservative and a Labour government in amendments that were called the Murdoch Amendments, which is just a coincidence. I don't know who they were named after. They were done to help one businessman who said, hey, can you change that law for me? I'd like to buy some more, and I'm an American citizen now. We changed what was working to suit one person for self-interest at that time. We changed them again in 2018. And that's why the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, the oldest media company in Australia, was sold. And it was sold to a TV station. We lost diversity. It was a decision made. Do any of you know who the communications minister was who made that decision? Do any of you know who the communications minister is now? These are massive decisions that have a huge impact in the world. They can and therefore should be challenged. And if you look at, and I happen to think, good policy, good discussion, let's make Google and Facebook, who, by the way, earn more from advertising than every radio station, TV station, and newspaper on the planet combined. So let's make them pay for the news that they're taking. Good decision. Look at what that can do. So let's just get out of this idea that these things are set, that they're rigid, that to question them is somehow, breaking some sort of oath. That's what we should be doing. If you gave me one election where we made journalism the focus and we said, whichever government we pick will do excellent journalism, then every election after that, from now on, will be better. That's my promise. Easy to promise because we're never going to do it. But that's the power of an informed citizenry voting on things that impact them, just like every student at any university in this country should be going to the next election going, you want to do what to my fees? You want to do what to my HECS? It shouldn't be the bad decision that comes in or the controversial decision that they disagree with for them to start paying attention, which was the whole foundation of journalism in the first place.
So I suppose you were just talking about the concentrated media ownership, basically, here in Australia. And I suppose that's kind of what I was getting at with this, where sharing content, these new laws about paying for content, and it's going to prop up this concentrated media industry and this concentrated ownership. Is that kind of, do we need another step beyond just keeping these corporations afloat? Do we need more diverse voices? I mean, the regional media has been, well, it's disappeared overnight, particularly over in the East. Do we need more diverse voices as well as strong voices?
I think there is diversity there, and like I said, I do think it's a balance, and a lot of those big organisations still are the big employers, and so from my perspective, wanting my students to get jobs, they offer some good opportunities for students. What we've found with the shutdown of some of the regional papers in the East is that they've already alternatives have come up. So, and often these are, real grassroots, local people from their local town now producing a newspaper or a website because that paper has gone. So, and some of them, it looks, like it's early days, but they're already making some money and things are looking quite positive. So I do think that there is a real mix. We do talk a lot about the concentration that is in the mainstream big metro media organisations, but there are lots of alternatives, and even in things like the magazine industry, which has seen a real decline in recent years, there's a whole new culture of indie magazines from all around the world that are doing really well. So often something else comes into that place, and sometimes it's a better thing.
There's barely a community in this country that doesn't have some form of outlet, whether it be a community radio station or a community newspaper. It's not difficult for any anthropologist or sociologist to say there is no community without news. It just happens when people get together. So appetite has never been lost. I was down in a tiny village near Pemberton, Northcliffe, and they had something called the carry, the carry tree. So it was the carry pigeon. And I popped into the shop and said, who's the newspaper? Oh, just some volunteers from town. And they put it out once a week. And I went, I just love that. There are something like 70 community radio licenses across Western Australia. When communities get together, this is a natural part of that evolution of how people interact with each other to know what's going on. So it's not hard for us to at least put on the table, how do we pay for this? What's a better model? How do we change the ownership laws to better reflect the purpose and direction of this? It shouldn't all be, if everything's designed for somebody in Sydney or somebody in New York to make $1 billion, then you're telling a fish that it's crap because it can't climb a tree. But if you're saying your purpose is to serve your community and we're going to find ways to fund you to help you do that, then you are getting a better outcome for it. So these are really actually quite simple in their essence, metrics and laws. We've made them incredibly complex, but they're not in their essence. So it's not hard for one government to make one decision to say, hey, how do we do this a bit better to better reflect what we think a country the size of Australia, are you kidding, with our tiny population? It's absolutely essential to our way of life. Let's treat it like that.
But the federal government has announced grants and has been offering grants to regional news outlets. I think it started last year. And so, a few years ago, we would have thought that was just never going to happen. The government doesn't give money to commercial media outlet, but we've already seen that starting to happen because they recognise that those communities need that service. And so, the model is changing. There's already been changes to it. And I think all of those things are good things. We need to look wherever we can for ways to keep media outlets going.
Got time for one more question. It's a bit aside from the topic we've been talking about, but I think it's worth mentioning. There's been a lot of stories lately about diverse racial representation in the media, or the lack thereof in Australia, and a lot of Anglo-Saxon people particularly appearing on TV, and the idea that that needs to improve. So I wanted to get your thoughts on these stories that have been coming out.
Oh, this is a bit of a passion project for me. I think it's great that that report came out and highlighted the Anglo-centric way that journalists are seen on Australian TV in particular. We absolutely need more diversity in terms of the people who are reporting and presenting news. But we also need, and this is part of that report, we need more diversity in the people who are included in news stories. And this is something that we as journalists actually have some control over. We need to be seeking out people from different cultural backgrounds, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, really trying to include as much diversity as possible in the way that we report things. And I think that can have a profound impact because people then are seeing themselves in the news. They're seeing their voices being included and their perspectives being included. So I would love to have, we have quite diverse student cohort now. That has changed over time. And I think that's a great thing. And I totally encourage students of different backgrounds to go into journalism because I see the value in that. But we can to me, there's two different elements to it. One is around news sourcing and who we include, and also about who is reporting the news.
Yeah, that's excellent. And Catherine's absolutely right. It isn't just about the storyteller, it's who the choices are around who's being interviewed. And what you're seeing from Catherine there is the ball game, isn't it? It's the will first. So as soon as you've got the will, you start workshopping the ideas. There's so many people who go, well, if you haven't got a fully formed idea that I know works, then let's not have the conversation. That's not how that works. Let's have the will to make a positive change and then see how we can do it. Unfortunately, the media is not one thing. It's a terrible word. Mass media is the worst phrase in the world. The ABC has very little in common with News Corp or Channel 7. These are wildly different institutions with different goals and means and mechanisms, so you can't lump them all in. So to create a singularity of voice and purpose usually has to come from those who regulate us, which is a government, and they're run by politicians who are not ideal because they're really only concerned about them and what they can do for themselves in their next election. And that's just the nature of modern democracy. So we need to look beyond that, and we are embracing, well, what can we do? So Catherine's been working on those ideas of how you get better representation on camera or in the newspaper report. I'm trying to start a project with my students where we're trying to encourage more Indigenous people to come into a news environment. And I'm happy to talk more about that if and when that project hopefully starts really working and bearing fruit. But that is a cohort of young journalism students here at Curtin University, mostly white, recognizing the problem, saying, hey, let's try and be part of a solution to bring other people into the news. That might cost them a job one day. So the idea that there's a fight going on or you have to be from those communities to recognize that is nonsense. There are so many good people with good ideas. So if we all do recognize that and work together with a bit of singularity of purpose, I think the answers are going to be pretty easy.
Well, hopefully, not just myself, but we get all sorts of students coming into the program and doing the extra things that need doing in the future. That's all we have time for today. Thank you, Catherine and Glyn, for sharing your knowledge on this topic.
Thank you.
Cheers, Tom.
You've been listening to The Future Of, a podcast powered by Curtin University. If you have any questions about anything that we've raised today, you can get in touch by following the links in the show notes. Bye for now.